there was an interesting situation last night on the Contender series. There was 5 fights. I think everyone got a contract or something along those lines. But that's not the point. But they had a 17-year-old, Rosas. I got his name up here somewhere. I'll get it in just a second. His last name is Rosas. Raul Rosas, I believe, is his name. And
Junior.
He was Junior, yes. And,
Put some
he was
respect
17
on his
years
dad.
old, 17 years old, which means he had to get basically a waiver from the Nevada Athletic Commission to compete because you otherwise have to be 18 to even apply for a license. He gets it. He wins his fight. BC, your impressions of how he looked against his opponent Gutierrez, and did you agree with Dana giving him a contract? And I want to point out something here. I don't know that it's a apples to apples comparison, but I see people bringing it up. Bo Nickel, right, one of the best wrestlers ever out of Penn State, a 3-time national champion, doesn't have as many pro fights, obviously, but has way more combat sports experience. Didn't get one after demolishing his opponent in like 30 seconds or whatever it was.
Yeah, this seemed like a contrast to that. I'm not necessarily mad at it, but let's start with the performance. Was it impressive? Absolutely. This kid's 17, Luke. I mean, we could fill hours of material about things we were doing at 17 that was very disappointing and depressing compared to this. He fights like a grown man. The activity, as Dana pointed out on the bottom, was key. His ground game, his ability to get in and out of dangerous situations and still find a way. Look, the promise jumps off of him. It's a great marketing tool to have essentially a teenager on here when, we haven't really truly seen at this age and this modern era, an elite fighter like this just come on board. I mean, one's got a couple teenagers at the high level, right, Luke?
Christian Lee was fighting in one when he was 17.
So, but I'm saying it's rare. You're right. We've seen in boxing, Wilfred Benitez was a world champion at 17. We see so many fighters in different cultures, including Mexico, and boxing turn pro at 15. I mean, Canelo's been boxing professionally for 17 years, 62 fights. So, Luke, was the performance 3 rounds worthy of the? Yeah, there's so much potential here, but this is an interesting conversation because there are certain combat sports. There are certain sports that involve physical contact. Where, the NFL, would you ever drop a teenager in there? You wouldn't. You'd send them to a, major D1 school for most likely 2 years and let them physically develop. You don't see, 14-year-olds that are really good at basketball walk into the NBA. Maybe other sports, golf and tennis, are different, but although boxing, MMA's brethren in this, is regularly doing that, is it the right move, Luke, to subject a teenager to this level of matchmaking and competition? In part because of the young age, for sure, but also in part because as much as the Dana White Contender Series has been a monster success in finding fresh talent and really just catapulting people into the main roster and big opportunities, we've seen a few too much too soon failures. I saw Dana make a positive comparison of Mickey Gall to Rojas, but we could just as quickly use Gall or Sage Northcutt as sort of like maybe too much too soon type of situations, although I get the point. Gall turned out to be a credible, day-to-day fighter there. Look, I don't really know. Should we have concerns? Should there be safeguards? Should there be any reason when you've got the talent of Rojas, who doesn't look like he's ready to fight for a world title, right? But looks like he belongs at least at this play-in level here that they've created with this reality show. Should we have physical or mental concerns of throwing a teenager into this kind of fire?
Yeah, I don't agree with this call by Dana White at all. 2 things I would say. Number one is everyone's like, oh my God, he's crazy talented. He's very talented. I don't know that I see crazy talent, nor should I. He's 17. It wouldn't really be possible to be like insanely talented. He's very talented. I saw Aaron Bronstetter, who I love. He was saying, oh my God, his grappling is high level. Well, it is and it isn't, right? I mean, his positional achievement and his positional control were pretty good. Actually, were very good. I'll give him credit there. They were very, very good. I wouldn't knock that at all. But if you have the back for as long as he did and you can't finish, there are some finishing issues. And that's okay if you're 17. You're not supposed to be that good at 17, and I don't think he's that good necessarily at 17. He's very, very good in certain ways, but if you have the back for that amount of time in MMA, I think he had the back for like almost 5 minutes in a 15-minute fight, and there was hardly any ground and pound. He had the Suloev stretch, but it ended up, the Suloev stretch, people were looking at the photos where Gutierrez's leg was turned on the inside, and it looks gruesome, but the Suloev stretch is to rip the hamstrings. That's not a hamstring ripper. He's just cranking on something. The point I'm trying to make here is he fights with a lot of intensity in certain areas. He clearly does have a lot of ability, but he is like not even close. I mean, you're supposed to be at 17, but he's not even close to being anywhere even remotely approximating A, a finished product, but B, I think a UFC ready product. Now, obviously, he can probably beat some guys in the UFC at the lower level. They can matchmake him in certain ways to give him time. But this idea that like, oh my God, like what we were looking at was like Boots Ennis or something.
Right.
No, that's not what you're looking at here at all. And I guess the second point I would raise is, dude, if you're 17, can I guarantee that he will go to the UFC and it will automatically fuck up his development? No, of course not. There are certainly ways where, especially if the people around him are very, very careful and he takes just the right fights and the matchmakers do him some solids along the way, where he could develop into something actually very impressive. He does have, I believe, that potential. Yes, I agree with the potential argument. But like, dude, he fought exactly the way you would imagine a very talented 17-year-old to fight. Tons of intensity, tons of aggression, and the way he was striking, if he fought anybody else who was like reasonably, talented at that level, he would have gotten demolished on the feet. Again, we're talking about a 17-year-old. He's not supposed to be all that great. I'm not knocking the guy for being where he's at. He's for what age he is, he's very, very good. But here's the point I'm trying to make. If the people around him aren't careful, and if the matchmakers aren't careful, they probably will fuck up his development. The UFC is not the place to go to round out your game. You can sharpen it, certainly as you get up there. People get better over time, no doubt about it. You see that. But if you don't walk in there with a much more developed skill set, I will put it this way. There is a high potential, anyway, to fuck up your development. So I would have given him a development deal. I would have done something like that because he clearly does have a lot of potential, but he is super green in a lot of areas. And I just didn't understand people being like, oh my God, we're looking at the next BJ Penn. No, you're not.
Well, look, it's a good marketing tool for the show to have a teenager on there. We want to see great, unique greatness in that regard. I agree with you that, it wasn't even like young Aaron Pico, meaning heading into that pro debut, there was enough sort of buzz and proven tape of like, holy shit, Aaron Pico might be ready to just walk in here off the street and make this happen because he'd been groomed for so long. I will give Rojas the credit that it did seem that he had sort of like next level poise.
Rosas, not Rojas.
Rosas, what'd you say? Rosas?
It's Rosas, not
Rosas. Yeah, sorry. I don't want to get that wrong. Thank you. The poise certainly was next level for 17. And you said, maybe you saw finishing issues for a 17-year-old Luke. We surely didn't have that at that age. In fact, if anything, we were finishing too quickly. But the greater point is, do you think, given the almost hypocritical response in comparison to how Dana's handling Bo Nickel, do you think he's willing to risk it all for the idea of potentially having a 17 or 18-year-old, competing in like a, top 10, top 15 and sort of making a push as this young phenom? Or do you think this signing is more about what you mentioned, a potential developmental deal like Chase Hooper signed, like Greg Hardy went and took, some regional-ish fights after his Contender Series performance? I guess my question is this, Luke. Should the UFC own an in-between? They already kind of do from the standpoint that they have all of these regional, and some well-regarded regional MMA properties under their banner on UFC Fight Pass. But do you think there should be an in-between in this case when you do have somebody who has unnatural ability for the age, but I don't really sure it's his best interest to be fighting on the undercard of a UFC card, in the next year, really? Should there be a UFC developmental league that he can get 2 or 3 fights on, or is that just basically regional MMA?
This is regional MMA, and you just don't want UFC occupying yet more space in MMA. It's not healthy. But I want to point out something. The guy he beat yesterday, Mando Gutierrez, that's a solid win. Like, it's a very, very... let's be very clear about that. Again, we're grading him as a 17-year-old, so what he did as a 17-year-old is, in that sense, very impressive. And beating Mando Gutierrez, that was a very impressive win. I'll give that to him. Here's the guys he beat before this. Andre Portocarrero, who was coming into the fight 0-3, is now 0-4. His opponent before that, Peñalosa, 2-1. His opponent before that, Villanueva, 1-1. His opponent before that, Peña, 1-1. And his opponent before that, which was his pro debut, I believe, Velasquez, 0-2. What about any of that screams prodigy to anybody? Like, again, he's 17. He's not supposed to be a prodigy. But like, people are like, oh my God, he looked amazing. He looked like a very talented, very green 17-year-old. He did not look to me like any kind of prodigy whatsoever, nor is it really possible to be a prodigy at 17 years old. You got to wait a few years. 2021, got to get a little bit of man strength under you. And again, he could develop into that, but that's where the point you raised comes in. If I was the UFC, I would have signed him to a developmental deal and then allowed him to fight in LFA, allowed him to fight in CFFC, allowed him to fight in wherever the fuck. I think he's in Las Vegas, so whatever is around in Tough Enough or whatever is around those parts. That's what I would have done. He clearly has high potential, very high potential. But the actual reality of what you have, he's got the one really, really good win against Gutierrez, and he had clear finishing issues in the department where he's supposed to be the very best. That's not a guy who should be signed to the UFC. I cannot guarantee this will be a disaster, but there is at least a lot of ways this could go poorly, and I didn't really agree that he should be getting a deal. But
okay, so in light of Dana's decision for what he did with Bo Nickel, which it seemed like it was a lot of, let's get another ratings boon out of this because he does seem to be legit. And also, I think at the time we were like, you can't argue against Dana. Like, he still is green, Bo Nickel. He still needs more challenges, of course. Well, this kid is in an almost, even deeper hole in that regard. So is this the kind of category you think Dana would have either poor judgment or not care about the judge? Like, how bad do you think Dana and company lust after the idea, even though this kid does not give you 20-year-old Mike Tyson vibes winning the heavyweight championship? He doesn't give you those vibes, right? That's a different special creature. But how much do you think they lust after that to legitimately have a, ratings bonanza teenager?
If he was 27, now granted, I understand being 17 means what he has done. I want to be very clear about this. It's very impressive, and his potential is certainly very, very, very high. But if he was 27 and fought the way that he did and had the record that he did, would they have signed him? No fucking chance. In other words, like, the question is, are they grading him on a curve? Yes! They are obviously grading him on a curve, which means they're going to have to match make him on a curve. I think that sort of thing is better suited for, if you have to be match made on a curve that much. Again, there's always a little bit of help that they can give someone, like, Sean O'Malley had a couple of soft entries into the UFC, and that's fine. Look what he's turned into. He's become pretty good. But if they have to grade you on a curve that much, you need to still be in regional MMA and work on your game. Dude, I'm telling you, once you get to the UFC, they can help you a little bit, for sure. But at some point, your development needs to be on track, and fighting really tough grown men can fuck that up. Pride was famous for this in a much worse way. They used to sign as like a spectacle. They would sign Olympic gold medalists from judo or wrestling and then just throw them to the deep end. And these guys, even if they fought out their first one or two fights, they would get fucked up. They would never turn into what they were supposed to, because once you get to that level, if you get exposed to it too quickly, it will ruin you. It will ruin you. This kid is too good to risk that, to me.
I mean, look, even Fernando Vargas in boxing, who's like a borderline Hall of Famer, right? Even he, Luke, you look back for somebody who won world titles as a teenager, basically, and fought, Oscar De La Hoya and Felix Trinidad in major pay-per-views, I think before even turning 22. We look back at the beatings he took in those knockout losses, even though he had moments, of course, as sort of saying, man, I wonder if that stunted his long-term growth. I wonder if he's one of those guys that in hindsight, you would have soft-matched a little bit further into his 20s to get him that experience. This is something completely different. So I almost want to re-ask the question I asked you, even though you gave a great answer to your own thoughts, to the spirit of my question. I just watched a Dana White interview yesterday in which he was talking about I read one where he was talking about Joe Pyfer and the success of the Contender Series. And Luke, he said, the Contender Series is so hot, I guarantee you it'll be on ESPN before you know it. That was more or less what he said. I'm paraphrasing. How much do you think Dana would, in this case, not care about if you can burn this kid out or give him too much too soon, for what it could say about his series if a 17 or 18-year-old kid is fighting on the real UFC on ESPN, and you're pointing back to, look, another win for Dana White and company, which, by the way, look, I love the series. I'm not here to trash it. But do you think in this case they would be ready and willing to do the exact opposite of a Bo Nickel and just throw him directly to the wolves under the hope that if it works out, look at what we made?
No, I think what will happen is they'll give him the Sage Northcutt treatment, right? They'll give him somebody at first that he can beat, maybe somebody second he can beat, maybe even somebody in the third fight he should beat, no problem. But like, he's talking about, I want to be champion by 20. Good luck, young man. You're going to need it. Good luck. Even the great John Jones couldn't do something like that, and he broke all the rules in every kind of way. Again, who's to say? No one can predict the future. I can't predict the future. I'm happy to eat crow if he ends up getting a belt at 20. I didn't see anything there that told me in 2 years' time he was going to be the very best in his weight class at 135 pounds. By the way, it should also be pointed out that his opponent, Mando Gutierrez, and that was a good win he got. I want to be very clear. It was a solid win. But you saw Mando Gutierrez's corner pleading with him to stop making the same mistakes over and over again. The commentary table being like, why is he making these choices? There was a lot of bad choices that aided the performance here. And again, it sounds like I'm beating up on the kid. I'm not. What I'm trying to do is warn people that if you rush somebody, even as promising as Rosas Jr., even as good as he is at 17, if you rush that, you will fucking ruin it. You will ruin it. And I'm trying to avoid that. I want to get the most out of this kid, not the first out of this kid.